Snow always made Portland look softer than it really was. That morning, the streets were quiet, under a thin layer of white, and the old maple trees along my parents' block looked like something out of a postcard. I was 34 years old, driving a rental car up the hill toward the house where I had spent my childhood, and every turn of the wheel felt like I was steering straight back into a storm I had tried to outrun for more than a decade. My son Mason sat in the back seat, humming to himself, tracing shapes in the fog on the window with his finger. He was 10, tall for his age, with my eyes and my dad's stubborn jaw. He had begged me to let him come this year, said he wanted to see where I had grown up, wanted to know his grandparents better. I had said yes, mostly because part of me needed to know if anything had really changed. Before I tell you what happened that night, I want you to think about where you are while you are listening. Are you cooking, folding laundry, driving, lying in bed, trying to forget a long day? For me, when this story finally broke open, I was sitting at my dad's dining table with a glass of cheap red wine going, warm in my hand, staring at the people who had raised me, and realizing I did not know them at all. If stories like this keep you company, you can let me know in the comments what you are doing while you listen and where you are listening from. And if you want to hear more, you already know how to stay. The Lane house came into view around the last curve, a big white colonial with green shutters and the same crooked front step my dad had always promised to fix. There were twinkle lights around the porch rail and a wreath on the door, tasteful and controlled, just like my mom. For a second, I let myself pretend I was just any woman coming home for Christmas, not the forgotten daughter coming back to the scene of the crime. Mason leaned forward between the seats. "This is it, right, Mom? Your old house." I nodded, my throat a little tight. "This is it. Granddad and Grandma are inside. And Aunt Chloe. And Lily." He grinned at the sound of his cousin's name, then flopped back, with the loose bonelessness only kids seem to manage. I parked behind a shiny new SUV I knew Chloe could not afford on her event, coordinator salary, and a truck I recognized as my dad's pride and joy. The numbers on the license plates had changed over the years, but the hierarchy in that driveway had not. The cold hit my face as soon as I opened the car door. I pulled my coat tighter, came around to help Mason with his bag, then stood for a heartbeat on the walkway, just breathing. The house smelled the same even from outside. Pine, roasted meat, and underneath that, something sharp and sour that was not in any recipe. My mom opened the door before we rang the bell, as if she had been watching from the front window, waiting to see if I would actually show up. Her hair was perfectly done, makeup soft but precise, sweater set in a deep cranberry red. She looked like a woman in a holiday commercial, if you ignored the tightness around her mouth. "Harper," she said. And there it was, that carefully neutral tone, as if I were a neighbor dropping by, not her younger daughter who had stayed gone for 5 Christmases in a row. She stepped aside so we could come in. The warmth and the noise of the house washed over me. I heard my dad's voice from the dining room, heard Chloe's laugh, high and bright like the clink of crystal. My dad appeared in the hallway, still broad-shouldered despite his age, his tie a little too tight, his expression a little too pleased with himself. He looked me up and down in one quick sweep, then glanced past me at the car. "So that is the famous scientist from Seattle," he said, not quite able to hide the smirk. "And you made it in one piece through the snow in that little rental of yours." I let it pass. Years of practice. "Hi, Dad. This is Mason, remember?" He looked down at my son like he was a neighbor kid selling wrapping paper. He gave a short nod and a pat on Mason's shoulder that landed more like a test than a welcome. "You are taller than the last time," my dad said. Then he turned around and called out for Chloe without waiting for an answer. Chloe swept in from the dining room in a dress that probably cost more than my plane ticket. Ryan right behind her with that salesman grin pasted on his face. Little Lily darted around their legs and launched herself straight at me, arms around my waist, her hair smelling like apples and shampoo. "Aunt Harper," she shouted, "I told everyone you were coming. Nobody believed me." That landed in a place I did not want to look at yet. I bent down, hugged her tight, forced a smile into my voice. "Good thing you were right then," I said. "Look who I brought." I turned her toward Mason. They eyed each other for a moment, 2 kids measuring the distance between stranger and cousin. Then Lily grabbed his hand and dragged him toward the living room to show him the tree. The tree was huge, perfect, covered in coordinated ornaments my mom had probably color-coded in her head. Underneath it, the presents were already arranged in neat clusters. I recognized Chloe's wrapping paper style, all metallic ribbons and calligraphy tags. Mine, the ones I had shipped ahead for everyone, sat tucked near the back. Still there, still unopened, like a quiet promise. Dinner came faster than I was ready for. We gathered around the long table in the dining room, the same table where I had done homework and been grounded and watched my dad praise Chloe for things I had done better. The china came out. The silver, my mom's wedding crystal. Rituals did not change, even if people did. The conversation flowed around me more than through me. Chloe talked about a gala she had coordinated, dropping names of local politicians and influencers. Ryan bragged about his numbers at the dealership, how many trucks he had moved this quarter. My dad listened to them like a king holding court, nodding at the right places, smiling in approval. When he turned to me, it was more out of obligation than interest. So he said, "I hear you are still doing something with plants and computers out there." I swallowed the first 5 responses that came to mind. "I work with a team that uses artificial intelligence to model crop genetics," I said. "It helps farmers predict yield and disease risk, and makes food more stable. We just finished a big trial in the Northwest." He snorted softly and took a sip of wine. "So you are still playing in the dirt, just with fancier toys." Across the table, Mason stiffened. I saw his jaw tighten in the same way mine did when I was trying not to cry in front of this man. I felt the cut, let it bleed under the skin instead of on the tablecloth. "Something like that," I said, and went back to my potatoes. By the time dessert plates were cleared and coffee poured, my mom clapped her hands softly, the signal she had used my whole life. "All right," she said. "Time for presents before everyone falls asleep." We moved back to the living room. The lights on the tree glowed warm against the windows dark with early winter night. The fireplace crackled. It could have been a postcard again if you did not listen too closely to the way people breathed. My mom took her usual place near the tree, the appointed giver, the one who decided the order of joy. She handed packages to Lily first, then to Chloe's family, moving in a slow circle. There were squeals and thank yous, and the rustle of expensive paper. My dad watched, looking absolutely content with himself, as if this entire scene had been staged under his direction. Mason received a small box from my parents. He opened it carefully. Inside was a plastic toy car, the kind you could pull back and let go. It was not nothing, but compared to the gaming console they had just given Lily, it was hard not to see the difference. He forced a smile and said thank you the way I had taught him, his voice a little too bright. Then the piles under the tree began to shrink. Everyone had opened something from everyone else. The floor was a sea of torn paper and ribbon. I waited for my name to be called, for a small box, a book, a scarf, anything that said someone had thought of me as more than a flight arriving, and a dish to fill. Nothing came. My mom glanced around as if she were checking her mental list. My dad leaned back in his armchair, one ankle on his knee, a glass of bourbon in his hand. Chloe was helping Lily assemble a set of markers on the coffee table. Nobody reached for another gift. It was Lily who noticed first. "What about Aunt Harper?" she said, turning toward the tree. "Where are her presents?" There was a beat, just long enough to make everything worse. My dad let out a short laugh, that familiar, dismissive sound. "Oh, we forgot you," he said, as if he were talking about a napkin left in the kitchen, not his younger daughter sitting on his sofa, watching him choose who mattered and who did not. Chloe laughed. Ryan tried to smother a grin behind his hand. My mom made a small noise that could have been embarrassment or amusement. I was not sure. At that moment, everything inside me went very quiet. Not empty, just still, like the surface of a deep lake when the wind dies down. 5 years ago, I might have cried. 10 years ago, I might have begged for an explanation. This time, I felt something different rising in my chest, something steadier and sharper, and far less interested in being loved. I set my coffee cup down on the side table. My hands did not shake. "That is all right," I said, my voice smooth enough that even I was surprised. "I actually brought something for myself this year." I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I could feel every eye in the room on me. Chloe was already rolling hers, ready to be entertained. My dad watched me with that look he used to give me when I walked up to them, plate at a softball game, half expecting me to strike out. I tapped a contact and put the phone on speaker. The ringing filled the room, bright and out of place among the soft music and the crackle of the fire. Ryan snorted. "Who are you calling?" he said. "One of your little science buddies." The call clicked, and then a voice I knew better than almost any in my professional life came through, warm and amused. "Harper," Professor Abram Holt said, "just when I was about to chase you down, I have news about our funding." The room went absolutely silent. Professor Holt's voice filled the room, and for a second, nobody breathed. My dad sat frozen, with his glass halfway to his mouth. Chloe's smile went stiff, and Ryan's hand paused in midair like someone had hit a switch inside him. I felt the weight of every stare in that room, but I kept my eyes on the floor, because looking at them would have broken the calm I had worked so hard to build. Professor Holt went on, talking about a budget approval and a board meeting he wanted me to attend in January, and how the preliminary results from the Northwest trial looked better than projected. He sounded proud, almost fatherly, the way my own dad had never learned how to be. When he paused to say that the entire department was lucky to have me, the silence in that living room tightened, like a string pulled too far. I thanked him, steady and polite, then told him I would send the updated files before I left Portland. He said he was looking forward to it and wished me a peaceful holiday. I tapped the call off and set the phone on the arm of the sofa. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the fireplace sounded too loud. It was Chloe who broke first. She let out a small laugh that hit the air like a thin sheet of ice cracking. She said she had no idea I was working with someone like him. She tried to sound casual, but her voice had that shiny edge she got whenever she realized the spotlight had slipped out of her hands. My dad leaned forward in his chair. His face had gone pale under the warm lamplight. He asked me in a low voice if that really had been Abram Holt, the one who had 3 major awards before he was 50, and the one who had consulted for half the companies in the country. I nodded. He swallowed hard. For the first time in a long time, my dad looked unsure. Then everything seemed to fall apart at once. My mom moved quickly, gathering wrapping paper that did not need to be gathered. Ryan asked a question he already knew the answer to, just to fill the silence. Lily pressed herself against my arm, confused but sensing something had shifted in the grown-ups. Later that night, after everyone retreated to their corners of the house, I walked Mason upstairs to the guest room. He held my hand tight. He had not said much after the call, and I could tell he was trying to understand what had happened. When I tucked him in, he asked in a small voice why Grandpa had said those things about me when I had friends like that professor man. I told him some people had trouble seeing value in others unless it came wrapped the way they expected. He lay quiet for a while, and then said he liked me just the way I was, and that he was proud I was his mom. I smoothed his hair and sat on the edge of the bed until his breathing softened into sleep. When I went back downstairs, the house felt different. The lights were still glowing on the tree, but the warm holiday veneer had peeled back to reveal something colder. My parents had gone to bed without saying goodnight. The kitchen was spotless. My mom's silent apology, or her silent message. I could not tell which. I walked into the den and stood in the dim light, looking at the familiar pictures on the wall. Chloe in her prom dress. My dad shook hands with some city officials. The family portrait from when I was 9, where I smiled too hard because I had been desperate for them to see me that day. I could still remember how my mom had adjusted Chloe's hair 3 times before. We took the picture and did not touch mine once. Small things, tiny things, but they add up. I leaned against the doorway and let myself drift back to the years when I had believed that trying harder would fix everything. I had been the girl who stayed late at school because science labs felt safer than my own kitchen. The girl who won county fairs and academic competitions, but always went home. To a dad who said that trophies did not matter if they did not fit into his idea of success. I remembered the day I got into UC Davis. I was 18, standing in the middle of my dorm hallway with an acceptance letter that felt like a golden ticket out of a life that did not fit. My mom had said it was nice, but asked how far the campus was and who would watch me so I would not make bad decisions. My dad had told me to think about something practical instead. It was Chloe who laughed and said I should not waste time learning things one cared about. I had smiled through all of it because I had already decided that I was leaving, no matter what they wanted. Then came the surprise pregnancy when I was 24. The father left before Mason was out of diapers, and I started over in a small apartment with a crib in the corner and a stack of textbooks on the kitchen table. My parents had not offered to help. They had told me I made my choices and should stick with them. I learned to study with Mason on my lap and to sleep sitting upright in a chair when research deadlines arrived. The years were hard, but they were mine, and they shaped me more than any approval my family could give. My mind walked through each memory as if I were turning pages in a book I had not touched in years. I could see myself in the graduate labs under fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. I remembered mixing soil samples with AI predictive models, layering old-world farming with future-world mapping, building something no one believed could work until it did. I remembered the first time Professor Holt stopped by my station and stayed, longer than a courtesy glance. He had asked questions no one else had asked, and listened to my answers as if I were speaking a language he had been waiting to hear. I drew a breath and let the den fall back into focus. The quiet pressed close around me. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the tick of the old clock in the hallway. This house had a way of shrinking me down to the size they preferred. But tonight, I felt tall again, like something inside me had rooted deeper rather than snapped. I stepped away from the den and made my way upstairs. The carpeted steps creaked the way they always had. The hallway smelled like the same pine cleaner my mom had used since I was a kid. At the end of the hall was the room that had been mine for 17 years, before I left for college. The door was half open. I pushed it wider, and the soft lamplight revealed a generic guest room. The posters and books from my childhood were gone long ago, replaced with crisp linens and matching pillows in a beige pattern. My mom probably thought looked sophisticated. The only hint of me was a small scratch on the window frame from when I had tried to sneak out one summer night, not to cause trouble, but to watch a meteor shower. I sat on the edge of the bed and let my thoughts settle. Tonight, I cracked open something I had kept sealed out of habit. Maybe it was the humiliation. Maybe it was the call from Holt. Maybe it was Mason's confused eyes trying to make sense of grown-up cruelty. Whatever it was, it pulled every buried memory into the light with it. For years, I had told myself that distance was the safest option, that staying away was a way to keep the peace. But now, sitting in the dim glow of this carefully sanitized guest room, I realized distance had not healed anything. It had simply given silence more time to thicken around all the things we had never said. I lay back against the pillow, listening to the calm of a house I no longer recognized. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. My parents did not know yet that their financial world was crumbling. Chloe did not know her perfect image had hairline cracks. And none of them understood that the version of me who walked into this house was not the same girl who had left it. Not anymore. I closed my eyes, but sleep did not come. The quiet felt too sharp, like waiting for the next thing to break. Sometime in the middle of the night, I gave up on sleep. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed a soft blue blur. I did not bother to focus on the numbers. It was late enough that my body ached, and early enough that the house still felt like it was holding its breath. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The carpet was cool under my feet. I could hear the faint hum of the furnace and the wind brushing against the old windows. It sounded like the past trying to get in. I told myself I was only going downstairs for a glass of water. That was the story I chose because it felt simple, harmless. The truth was, part of me wanted to see the house when it was not performing, when no one was smiling too widely or laughing too loudly for the benefit of anyone else. The hallway was dim, lit only by the sliver of light spilling out from under my parents' bedroom. I moved slowly down the stairs, careful to avoid the step that always creaked. My body remembered that one, even if my mind was somewhere else. I was almost at the bottom when I heard it. Not the murmur of two people talking before they drifted off to sleep, but the tight, sharp rhythm of people fighting. and trying not to be heard. My mom's voice floated down the hallway from the kitchen, a hissed whisper that carried more anger than volume. She was saying that this could not go on, that the bank had already called twice, that they could not keep pretending everything was fine. I stopped and stayed in the shadow at the base of the stairs. Old habits. You learn early in a house like mine that it is safer sometimes to listen from the edges than to stand in the center of the room. My dad's voice came next, low and defensive. He said he had it under control. He always had it under control. He reminded her that the company had seen tough years before and he had pulled them through, that this was just another rough patch in construction, that bids came in waves. He sounded more tired than confident. My mom did not back down. She said the second mortgage payment was due right after New Year's and the credit line was maxed out. She listed years: 2020, 2021, 2022. Each one is like a stone dropping into cold water. She said he had been robbing Peter to pay Paul for almost 5 years and that there was nothing left to shuffle. The phrase made me flinch. It was something my grandmother used to say when the bills piled up on the kitchen table. My dad snapped back that if she wanted to live in a nicer neighborhood and drive the kind of car she insisted on, this was the cost. Then his tone shifted, brittle and sharp. He said if Chloe would just get serious about landing a real sponsor for her event business instead of taking pretty pictures for social media, they would not be in this mess. He said if I had ever come home and joined the family company like a good daughter, he would not have had to stretch himself so thin. There it was. He had managed to blame the bank, the market, my mom, my sister, and me in less than a minute. Classic Charles Lane. My mom countered. She reminded him that it had been his idea to refinance the house the first time, and then again, and then to open that business line of credit last year to cover payroll. She said that having a big truck and a corner office did not mean anything if the bank owned their walls. Her voice cracked when she asked him what would happen if the bank took the house. Where would they go? Where would they put the tree next year if there was no living room left to decorate? I leaned my shoulder against the wall to steady myself. The picture was forming in my head, whether I wanted it to or not. The carefully curated decorations, the expensive meal, the show of wealth and stability. It all sat on top of a hollow foundation, just like the way they treated us. From the outside, it looked solid. Inside, everything was cracked. My dad said something then that made my stomach twist. He said at least Chloe understood the importance of appearances. He said at least she showed up and looked like success, that she knew how to keep the Lane name shiny. He said I had run off to play with dirt and data and left them to carry the weight of keeping up. My mom's reply was softer, but it hit harder. She said that all his keeping up was exactly what had dragged them under. That he had mortgaged not just the house, but their future for the illusion of being the man on top. That he was not the king of anything now, except unpaid bills. A chair scraped against the tile and I heard my dad's hand hit the table. He told her not to talk to him like that in his own house. She fired back that it would not be his much longer if he did not pick up the phone and call the bank in the morning. The image of my dad on the phone begging some loan officer for an extension flashed through my mind. The man who used to throw his shoulders back and stride into every room like he owned it suddenly seemed smaller, more human, more dangerous in his desperation. I stepped silently back up a few stairs, then turned and went down the side hallway to the back door instead of walking, past the kitchen. I did not want them to know I had heard. Not yet. The cold air that seeped in through the glass helped clear my head. I stood there for a long minute, pressing my fingertips into the wood of the doorframe until they hurt. So this was the truth under the dinner show. They were not just unkind, they were drowning. And a person who is drowning will grab onto anyone around them, even if they have to push them under. The next morning, the house looked normal again. Coffee brewing, bacon on the stove, holiday music playing low on the radio. My mom moved around the kitchen with the practiced grace of a woman who knew how to cover anything with the right tablecloth. My dad sat at the counter, scrolling through his phone, jaw set, eyes tired. He glanced up when I walked in and said a flat, "Good morning," as if nothing had. ever been thrown across that kitchen table in the dark hours. My mom asked if I had slept well. I lied and said I had. After breakfast, while Mason went outside with Lily to experiment with icy snowballs on the driveway, I slipped my coat on and stepped onto the front porch. The air was crisp enough to sting my lungs. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled to a contact I had not used in months. Jacob Reed had been a year ahead of me in high school, the quiet boy who always sat in the back of the room and still knew all the answers. He had gone on to law school and come back to Portland to handle real estate and small business cases. We had reconnected years later when I needed someone to glance at a patent contract. He had always been straight with me, even when the truth burned. He answered on the third ring. He sounded surprised, but genuinely glad to hear from me. We did the small talk first. How have you been? And I heard you were working on something big in Seattle. Then I asked him if he still had access to public filings on local properties and corporate records. I told him I was standing on my parents' porch, and I needed to know how bad things actually were. I heard the soft sound of keys on his end, the tap of information coming into focus. He started with the house. He said it had been refinanced once in 2020, again in 2022. He said there was a home equity line on top of that, open last year. He rattled off estimated balances, and I converted them in my head to months of payroll, research grants, mortgages on my own small place in Seattle. It was a lot. More than I had expected, less than I had feared. Enough to sink them if anything tipped. Then he moved on to my dad's company, Reed Construction, the name my dad loved to hear other people say, had seen a string of projects delayed or canceled, lawsuits, liens, slow-paying clients, a pattern that started around the time the economy shifted and interest rates climbed. Jacob used careful words, but I could hear what he was not saying. The company was not dead, but it was on life support. He hesitated, then told me something else. He said there was a notice filed from a supplier last month, the kind that sometimes comes before a lawsuit. He said my dad had always paid on time before, at least from what the public documents showed. Something had changed. I thanked him and promised I would keep his name out of any conversation with my family. He said he knew I would. He asked quietly if I was all right. I told him I was. It was not entirely true, but it was not entirely false either. When I hung up, I stayed on the porch, staring at the street I used to bike down as a kid. The snow had turned to slush at the edges where car tires had cut through. A woman in a blue coat walked her dog past the house, not even glancing up. To her, this was just another home in a quiet neighborhood. She had no idea that behind the wreath and the white trim, everything was held together by fear and pride. The picture was clearer now. My dad was not just a man who liked control. He was a man standing on a financial cliff, pretending the ground was solid. My mom was not just cold. She was scared and furious and clinging to the only image of stability she had left. Chloe had tied her image to theirs so tightly that if they went down, she would too. And me. I was the one who had gotten away. The one who no longer needed this house or this name to survive, which made me a threat in a way I had not understood before. Someone who could afford to say no. A car door slammed and I looked up to see Mason and Lily coming back from the driveway, cheeks flushed, breath puffing in small clouds. They ran toward the porch, arguing about whose snowball had gone farther. Mason saw my face and slowed. I made myself smile and opened the door for them, letting the warmth of the house swallow us again. I knew two things as I stepped back inside. First, my dad's world was much closer to collapsing than he wanted anyone to see. Second, when he finally realized just how much I knew and just how far I had climbed. Without him, he was not going to ask for understanding. He was going to ask for rescue. I could already feel the shift coming, like a quiet pressure in the air before a storm. My dad was not going to ask for understanding. He was going to ask for rescue. It happened sooner than I expected. I had barely stepped into the hallway when I saw him standing near the living room archway. His arms were crossed, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on me like he was trying to decide whether to be charming or intimidating. He still looked tired. Maybe he had not slept either. He said my name in a tone that pretended to be casual, but carried too much weight to be anything close to gentle. He asked if we could talk for a minute. It was not really a question. I knew that tone. You learn it as a child, long before you can put words to what it means. I told Mason and Lily to go finish the puzzle on the dining table and followed my dad into his office. That room always felt colder than the rest of the house, even when the heat was on. Maybe it was the dark wood or the stiff leather chairs. Maybe it was because most of the trouble in our family history lived inside those walls. He walked behind his desk, but did not sit. He placed both hands on the back of his chair, gripping it like he needed its support. He started talking about work, about construction and the market, and how everything was shifting. He spoke in circles at first, testing the ground. Then he said it plainly. He told me he needed help. For a long moment, I did not say anything. I let the silence sit between us and watched him try to manage his own expression. His pride was fighting for air. I asked him what kind of help. He hesitated, then explained that he had a large project that was supposed to begin in January, a commercial redevelopment outside Portland. He had signed contracts. He had commitments. He said it could pull them out of the hole if everything went smoothly. He said the bank was dragging its feet on approving the last draw. He said he just needed a little bridge. Just a little. He did not mention the refinancing or the home equity line. He did not mention the suppliers or the overdue accounts Jacob had told me about. He did not mention the cracks in the foundation. He only mentioned the part he thought might still sound strong. I asked him how much he needed. He stared at the floor as he said the number. It was a lot. More than most people saw in a year. Less than I had feared, but still enough to choke someone who had not prepared for it. Enough to show how far gone things were. I kept my face still. I did not tell him that I knew everything already. I did not tell him that his secrets had spilled onto my phone screen on a cold porch less than an hour earlier. I did not tell him how small he suddenly looked to me at that moment. Not because he was struggling, but because he was still pretending he was not. He said he hated asking. He said he wished he did not have to. Then he said the part that made my throat tighten. He said that family sticks together, especially when things get hard. I let those words wash over me like cold water. Family sticks together. The same man who had cut me out of Christmas gift lists. The same man who had spent years dismissing my work as gardening and guessing. The same man who had raised a golden girl and a ghost and made sure the ghost knew her place. I asked him why he thought I could help, if he knew anything about my work. If he understood what I did in Seattle, if he had ever once asked. He waved it off. He said he knew I was doing well. He had heard things. He said, with my salary and whatever I had saved up in research grants, or bonuses, I could probably swing it. Then he smiled like he was being reassuring. That was when I understood the truth in full. He did not see me as successful. He did not see me at all. He still saw a daughter who should be grateful to be included in anything, a daughter who should help, because that was what daughters did, a daughter whose value was determined by what he needed, not who she was. I told him I would think about it. His shoulders dropped in relief. He thanked me and said he knew I would do the right thing. When I stepped back into the hallway, I felt like I had been standing in a room with no oxygen. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine from the candle my mom kept burning. But the scent felt sharp and out of place, like it belonged to a different family. I walked toward the kitchen to refill my coffee, trying to center myself, when I heard Chloe's voice drifting down the stairs. She was talking on speakerphone to one of her friends. She said something about how Dad was in a rough spot, but it was fine, because I would help. She said my name with that tone she always used, the one that made me sound like a person who should feel lucky to be part of anything she touched. She laughed and said I had always been good about stepping in quietly when things got tight. She said at least I could finally contribute something real. I stopped in the middle of the hallway. The heat of anger hit me so fast I had to close my eyes to steady myself. The way she said it, the ease of it, the certainty. She had already decided I was the solution. Not because she believed in me, but because she believed I owed them. I wanted to walk away, but my feet carried me into the kitchen instead. Chloe spun around, startled, her phone still in her hand. She said she had not seen me there. She said she was just talking nonsense. She said I should not worry about whatever I might have heard. I told her I was not worried. I told her it just helped clarify things. She gave me a bright smile that did not reach her eyes. She said that the family needed to stay strong. She said that image mattered. She said that keeping everything looking stable was important for Dad, for the business, for all of us. She said she trusted me to understand. I did not trust myself to speak without saying something I could not take back. I walked out to the backyard instead. The air was cold, the kind that makes your lungs sting, but it felt better than the thick tension inside the house. Lily was sitting on the low stone wall near the garden shed, trying to convince a small patch of frozen ground to cooperate with her. Plastic shovel. She looked up when she saw me and asked why grown-ups always looked so tired at Christmas. I told her that sometimes adults forgot what the holiday was supposed to mean. She said she was just glad I was there. Then she told me she saved the biggest ornament on the tree for me to hang because she wanted something pretty, up high, where everyone could see it. That did something to me. Something small but steady. It pulled me back into myself. I glanced up at the house. The windows glowed warm against the winter sky. Inside those walls were people who believed I was there to carry them. People who did not see me. Not really. Not fully. People who had already decided what I owed. But sitting there with my daughter, I understood something else. They could not ask for rescue if I was not willing to step into the water. A door opened behind us. I turned and saw my mom leaning out, calling my name with a careful tone that told me she was trying to sound light and not quite managing it. She said lunch would be ready soon and that she needed to talk to me. I brushed the snow off my coat and stood. No, this conversation would not be any easier than the last. I followed her inside and felt the house close around me again, the warmth and the weight settling like a familiar cloak. I already knew what she wanted, and I already knew what I needed to say. I followed my mom into the kitchen, already bracing myself. The smell of soup and baked rolls filled the room, but underneath it, I could feel the tension she carried in her shoulders. She moved to the counter, fussing with a dish towel that did not need to be straightened. For a moment, she just stood there, fingers smoothing the fabric. Then she turned toward me. She said we had not really had a chance to talk. She said it was nice to have me home. Her voice was careful, too careful, like someone testing ice. I leaned against the counter across from her and waited. She took a breath and said she knew my dad had probably already spoken to me. She said he was proud, and sometimes that got in his way. She said the past few years had been harder on him than he wanted to admit. Work slowing down, clients backing out, the economy doing whatever it wanted, instead of what they had planned. I watched her face as she spoke. The tiny lines around her mouth looked deeper in the bright kitchen light. She was not just cold. She was tired and scared, and trying very hard not to let either of those things show. She told me that when you build a life around a certain standard, people expect you to maintain it. She said your friends, your neighbors, your church, all watch what you drive, and where you live, and what your children do. She said it was not easy for my dad to go from a man people admired to a man. The bank called twice a week. She reached for a mug and set it on the counter in front of me, even though I already had coffee. It was something to do with her hands. Then she finally said what she had brought me in there to hear. She said my dad needed me, not us, not the family. Me. She said I had always been resourceful, that I had always landed on my feet, that even when I made decisions they did not agree with, like having Mason or moving to Seattle, I somehow made it work. She said I was successful now, even if she did not fully understand what I did. She said maybe, just this once, I could use that success to help them. I asked her what help looked like in her mind. She glanced at the doorway, as if making sure no one else was listening, then lowered her voice. She said that if I could give my dad the cushion he was asking for, just for a little while, it would give him time to stabilize things. She said it would keep the bank at bay and give him room to finish the project he believed would turn everything around. She said it would mean the world to him. Then she added something that sat heavy between us. She said that a good daughter never forgets where she came from. That family always comes first, even when it is hard. I felt something in my chest tighten. I thought about all the times family had not come first, when it was me on the line. When I was the one juggling 2 jobs and a toddler and night classes. When I was the one sending pictures of Mason that no one bothered to print. When I was the one walking across a graduation stage to a half-empty row of seats. I told her I understood things were hard. I told her I knew more than she thought I did about what was going on. Her eyes flicked to mine at that. A flash of surprise. Maybe worry. I said I also knew that giving someone money they were not ready to handle could be like pouring water into a cracked glass. It might look full for a moment, but it would not stay that way, and sometimes it just made the cracks worse. Her lips pressed together. She asked if that meant I was refusing to help. I said it meant I was not going to give her an answer while I was standing in her kitchen with a pot on the stove and kids in the next room. It meant I needed to be careful about stepping into a mess I did not make, and it meant I was not going to be guilted into anything with phrases about good daughters. Her eyes hardened then, just a little. She said she was not trying to guilt me. She said she was trying to remind me that family is not transactional, that not everything should be weighed on a scale. The irony of hearing that in this house almost made me laugh. How many times had my worth been weighed and found lacking in the very rooms that now asked me for rescue? I told her lunch was going to burn if she did not check the oven. It was a small deflection, but it ended the conversation for the moment. She turned away, shoulders stiff, and I stepped out of the kitchen before I said something we could not pull back from. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange, slow motion. The television droned in the background while football players collided on the world screen. Chloe scrolled through her phone, angling it so the light hit her face just right for photos. Ryan talked too loudly on a call about a truck deal he claimed he was closing. My dad kept pretending to read the paper, though the pages never turned. I sat in an armchair near the window, half watching the kids build a crooked tower out of blocks on the rug, and half listening to the low hum of the house. My phone buzzed in my pocket. When I saw the name on the screen, the tension in my shoulders eased for the first time all day. It was Professor Holt. I slipped into the empty dining room and answered, keeping my voice low. He greeted me with that easy warmth that had once made me feel like I belonged, in a world of people with sharper elbows and older money. He asked if it was a bad time. I told him it was as good as any. There was a pause while he adjusted something on his end, and I could hear faint voices in the background, the sound of a busy lab on the other side of the country. He said he had good news. The funding committee had not only approved our proposal, they had increased the allocation. The original $20 million had become $30. The language he used was all formal. Allocation, approval, scope. Underneath it, what he was really saying was that the work we had done, the work I had led, had convinced a federal board that we were worth betting on. He told me the agency wanted a public announcement in the new year. He said there would be press, panels, maybe even a feature in one of the bigger science magazines. He said my name would be on every document as the principal investigator. As he spoke, I could see the headlines in my mind. The woman in this old, familiar body, the one who had once been told to pick something practical and stop dreaming, now standing in a field that stretched from satellite maps to soil samples, from farmers' hands to government offices. I felt my lungs fill with something that tasted like validation, but deeper, not the shallow kind that needs applause, the solid kind that comes from knowing the work itself matters. He asked me if I was ready for what might come. The attention, the expectations, the questions. I told him I had been underestimated for most of my life. Being seen clearly might be an adjustment, but it was one I was ready to make. He laughed softly and said that was what he had always admired about me. That and my refusal to pretend to be smaller than I am just to make others comfortable. When we ended the call, I sat there at the dining table for a while, phone face down, fingers resting lightly on the wood. The contrast between that conversation and the ones I had been having in this house pressed against my ribs. Out there, in labs and conference rooms and virtual meetings, people trusted my judgment. They handed me millions of dollars in resources and said, "We believe you can do something with this." In here, my own parents still talked about me like I was a kid playing in the mud. As if on cue, my email chimed. I opened it and saw a message from Savannah Brooks, the venture partner who had visited Verdant Labs in Seattle 3 months earlier. Her subject line was simple: next steps. She wrote that she had heard about the federal funding and wanted to talk early in the new year about a private investment to expand our modeling work into more regions She mentioned numbers that made my dad's plea that morning look like a rounding error. She said she believed we could change entire systems if we moved quickly and strategically. I read her message twice, then tucked the phone back into my pocket as footsteps approached the dining room. Chloe poked her head around the doorframe. She said everyone was hungry and asked if I could help set the table. Her smile was bright and practiced, the kind you put on before stepping on stage. I followed her into the kitchen and reached for plates without being asked. As I moved around my mom and the hot dishes and the clatter of utensils, my mind kept circling the same point. There were 2 stories about me in this house. One was the one my family had written, the one where I was the difficult daughter who left, the one with the strange job that no one understood, the one they could call on when things went bad because she would not say no. The other story was the one I had spent years writing in labs and fields and late-night meetings. The story where I was a leader, an expert, someone whose decisions rippled out across states. The gap between those 2 stories had never felt wider. My dad said grace in a voice that sounded more brittle than grateful. As everyone dug in, conversation turned to holiday plans, neighbors, the usual small talk. I listened and answered when spoken to. But somewhere deep inside, a decision was starting to take shape. If they wanted to pretend nothing had changed, that was their choice. But I did not have to pretend with them. Not anymore. Dinner carried on with the usual clatter of forks and half-hearted politeness, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Beneath the warm lights and the smell of roasted chicken and rosemary, a quiet resolve had already settled into place. I did not have to pretend with them anymore. The moment we finished eating, my dad excused himself to take a call. My mom began gathering plates even though I told her I could do it. Chloe drifted toward the living room so she could angle herself in the glow of the Christmas tree for another photo. Ryan followed her, loudly narrating some story about a client nobody asked to hear. I carried dishes to the sink, rinsing plates one by one, letting the warm water run over my hands while I tried to steady myself. I could hear Mason and Lily in the hallway arguing lightly about which cookie tin belonged to whom. Their voices grounded me just enough that I felt the sharp ache in my chest soften for a moment. When the last plate was stacked, I dried my hands and stepped into the living room. My mom was standing by the tree. She looked up quickly, as if she had been waiting for me. She asked if I had a minute. The way she said it made my stomach tighten again, but I nodded. She gestured toward the back porch. It was already dark outside, the kind of winter night that settles fast and heavy. I followed her to the sliding door, and we stepped out into the cold. The porch light cast a soft yellow circle around us, everything else sinking into shadow. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and took a breath. She said she knew today had been intense. She said she knew I had a lot on my mind. Then she told me she wanted to explain something she had never told me before. Her voice dropped, softer than I had heard in years. She said that when I left for college, the house felt emptier than she expected. She said she thought letting me go would feel like relief, because I had always pushed boundaries, but instead it felt like something important had been pulled out of the walls. She said the distance between us had been her fault as much as mine. I watched her face in the dim light. For the first time in a long time, she looked less like someone who wanted the world to admire her, and more like someone who did not know how to fix what she had broken. She said she had grown up believing certain things. Those daughters stayed close. Those daughters chose safe careers. Those daughters made choices that made sense to their families. She said when I did not do any of that, she did not know how to hold the pieces. Then she mentioned Chloe. She said Chloe had been easier. She was born into the mold and never tried to leave it. She said people like that were easier to love out loud. I felt something crack inside me then. Not in a painful way, more like a shell giving way to air. I told her I had never asked her to love me out loud. I only wanted her to see me. Just once. She nodded slowly. She said she saw me now. She said she knew what I had built on my own. She said she knew I was strong in ways she never had been. I wanted to believe her. I wanted it badly enough that it hurt. But the truth was more complicated than the moment we stood in. I asked her why she and my dad only seemed to see me when they needed something. The air went still. She said that was not fair. She said parents worry about their children, that they think about their struggles, that they want to fix things, that sometimes they use the wrong words, but the intentions are good. I asked her if intentions had ever protected me when I needed them. She flinched at that, a small but unmistakable movement. Before she could answer, the sliding door opened behind us and my dad stepped out. He said he did not mean to interrupt. His voice was cold, but his eyes darted between us with something like suspicion. My mom straightened. She said we were just talking. He nodded stiffly, then turned his full attention to me. He said he needed an answer. Tonight. He said the project timeline was tight. He said the bank needed confirmation of future funds first thing in the other morning. He said every hour mattered. He said it all without looking desperate, but the desperation hung in the air anyway. I asked him why he thought I should be the one to solve this. He said, because family helps family. I asked him when that had last applied to me. His jaw tightened. He said he was not going to get into old arguments. He said what mattered was now. He said he knew I was doing well, and that whatever resources I had could help save the company. He said he had always expected great things from me, and that this was finally a chance for me to step up. Step up. The phrase hit me like ice water. Behind him, through the glass, I could see the glow of the tree. The neat line of stockings hung on the mantel, the framed family photos that told a prettier story than the one we lived in. I asked him how much he needed. He told me the number again, more forcefully this time, like that would make it sound smaller. I let the silence stretch long enough that even he shifted his weight. Then I told him I needed time to think. He said time was the one thing he did not have. I told him that was not my fault. We stood there staring at each other, the cold biting through my sleeves. My mom stepped between us, touching his arm as if to quiet him. She said we could talk more after church tomorrow. She said emotions were high. She said we should all breathe and focus on Christmas Eve. My dad muttered something under his breath and walked back inside. My mom lingered, eyes pleading without words, then followed him. I stayed on the porch alone, staring at the dark yard. Snow dusted the bushes, catching the porch light in soft glints. For a moment, I wished I could disappear into the quiet, into the part of winter that did not expect anything from anyone. But I was still standing there when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Mason. He asked if I was cold. I said, a little. He slipped his hand into mine, his grip warm and steady, and said he did not trust the way people were whispering in the house. I asked him what he meant. He said he and Lily heard Chloe talking on the phone again. He said she told someone that everything would be fine because I had money now. She said I owed it to the family to fix things. My chest tightened. Mason said he did not like the idea of people deciding what I owed. Neither did I. I squeezed his hand and told him we were going back inside. I told him tomorrow would be a long day. I told him we would handle it together. When we stepped through the door, the warmth hit my face again, and the smell of cookies drifted through the air. The house looked peaceful, almost beautiful in the low glow of Christmas lights. But I knew the truth under it now, the truth no one wanted to look at closely. Tomorrow, everything will start to crack. That thought stayed with me all night and into Christmas Eve, like a song I could not turn off. The morning passed in a blur of small tasks. My mom moved through the kitchen on autopilot, basting the roast and checking timers. The television murmured in the background with some old holiday movie that one was really watching. Outside, the sky had that flat gray look that promised either snow or rain, but had not decided which. Mason found a board game in the hall closet and tried to rope Lily into playing. She took it as an excuse to sit as close to him as possible on the living room rug and explain the rules 3 different ways, even though he could read the box himself. Their easy laughter cut through the heaviness in the house, a reminder that for them, this was still supposed to be a holiday. My dad disappeared into his office right after breakfast. I heard the low murmur of his voice through the closed door and the sharp edge that crept in when he talked to whoever was on the other end. Bank, supplier, project manager, it did not really matter. He was juggling plates and knew one of them was bound to fall. By late afternoon, my mom announced that we should all get ready for dinner. She wanted to eat a little earlier, she said, so the kids would have time to calm down before the church service. Old traditions, still clinging to the bones of this family. I went upstairs to change into the one dress I had packed that felt decent, enough for a holiday dinner. Simple black, long sleeves, nothing that shouted, "Please look at me." I stared at myself in the mirror for a long moment, adjusting a stray curl, noticing the faint lines at the corners of my eyes that had not been there the last time I sat at this table for Christmas. I did not resent them. They were proof that I had lived my own life, even when it hurt. When I came back down, the dining room was already set, candles in the center of the table, flickering softly. My mom's good china, the pattern with the tiny blue flowers that had only come out for special occasions when I was a kid. She was fussing with the silverware, making sure it was perfectly aligned. My dad stood by the window, staring out at the dark yard as if he could see an answer there. Chloe made her entrance a few minutes later, as if she were walking into a gala instead of a family dinner. Her dress was deep green, her makeup immaculate. Ryan followed, adjusting his tie and patting his pockets for his phone. They looked like they were stepping into a photograph, ready for someone to capture the image of a perfect holiday. We all took our seats. My dad at the head of the table, my mom at the other end. Chloe on one side, me on the other. The kids at the far end near my mom, like a separate island. My dad cleared his throat and bowed his head. He said grace in the same words he always had, asking for blessings and thanking God for family and provision. I kept my eyes closed longer than usual, mostly so I did not have to see how easily the words rolled off his tongue when his actions so often spoke another language. Once plates were filled and glasses poured, the conversation began in careful bits. My mom asked Chloe about an upcoming event she was planning for the new year. Cole launched into a detailed description of sponsors and venues and guests. Lists, she used phrases like brand alignment and local visibility, and my dad nodded along as if every word were gospel. Ryan chimed in with an update on truck sales, talking about incentive programs and closing strategies. He made it sound like he was building a legacy instead of just hitting quotas, and my dad seemed happy to treat it that way. When the attention finally turned my direction, it did not really turn. It skimmed across the surface. My mom asked in a vague way how work was in Seattle. My dad asked if I ever thought about doing something closer to home. Chloe smiled and said it must be nice to have a job where you can work from a laptop and not have to deal with real people. I could have answered any of those remarks. I could have explained that my work impacted real people more than they would ever know. Farmers planting crops, families who needed stable food prices, communities trying to prepare for weather patterns that were changing faster than anyone wanted to admit. Instead, I kept my voice even and said that work was busy and complicated and that I was grateful for the team I had. It was the kind of answer that gave them nothing to argue with and nothing to understand. The kids started to get restless halfway through the meal. Lily dropped her fork and giggled. Mason tried to quietly ask for more potatoes and knocked his water glass with his wrist instead. It tipped, and icy water rushed across the table toward my dad's plate. For one split second, it was nothing more than an accident with a minor cleanup. Then my dad's face changed. His jaw clenched, and he pushed his chair back hard enough that it scraped loudly against the floor. He snapped at Mason in a voice that made the hairs on my arms stand up. He asked him what was wrong with him. He said 10-year-old boys should know how to sit at a table without acting, like toddlers. He said maybe if I spent less time at my computer and more time teaching my son how to behave, we would not have to deal with this kind of thing. The room froze. Mason's eyes went wide and shiny. His shoulders hunched in on themselves in a way I recognized too well. I had been that child more times than I could count, absorbing the blame for things that did not deserve the weight he threw at them. Something inside me snapped. But it was not a wild break. It was clean and sharp. I picked up my napkin, dabbed at the water nearest my plate, and then met my dad's eyes directly. My voice came out calmer than I felt. Mason spilled a glass, I said. That is all. It happens. If we are going to lose our minds over water, maybe the problem is not the kid. He looked at me like he could not quite believe I had spoken out loud. My mom murmured something about it being fine and reached for more napkins. Chloe rolled her eyes and said, "Boys would be boys," in a tone that sounded more like criticism than comfort. My dad did not back down. He said respect started at the table. He said this was exactly what he meant when he talked about me making different choices. He said children reflected their parents, and we were all seeing the reflection right then. I felt Mason flinch, as if the words had hit his skin. I pushed my chair back just enough to be able to turn toward him. I put my hand on his arm and caught his eye. "You are fine," I told him. "Accidents happen. You did nothing wrong." He swallowed hard and nodded, trying to believe me over the echo of his grandfather's anger. Lily looked between all of us, confused and worried. Then she reached across the table and nudged Mason's elbow with her own, whispering that she spilled things all the time and that Grandpa just did not, like stains on the tablecloth. It was such a small act, but it cut through some of the tension like a beam of light through a narrow window. My dad opened his mouth, ready to throw something else on the fire. But my mom touched his hand and told him firmly that it was Christmas Eve and that they were not going to ruin dinner over a glass of water. The rest of the meal limped along. Conversation picked up in stilted pieces. People commented on the food, the weather, and the church service later. No one mentioned what had just happened, but the air in that room had changed. Something that had been kept under the surface for decades was finally starting to show. When the plates were cleared and the kids were sent upstairs to put on nice clothes for church, I escaped to the front porch. The cold hit me in the face like a blessing. I wrapped my arms around myself and stared out at the quiet street, watching the glow of other people's living rooms through their curtains. I thought about my dad's words, about reflections and respect, and what children learn at the table. He was not wrong that kids learn by watching. He just did not realize what lesson he had just taught his grandson. He had taught him that power could be used to humiliate. Those mistakes were unforgivable. That love could be withdrawn over something as simple as condensation on a table runner. I stood there until the tips of my fingers went numb and my breath came out. Invisible clouds. Tomorrow morning would bring the gifts and the show and another chance for my parents to act like everything was fine. For the first time in my life, I knew I was not going to let that stand. I turned back toward the house, my hand on the door handle, and took one last deep breath of the cold air. Inside, the lights were warm and the music was soft, but I could feel the cracks spreading under the surface. Tomorrow, I thought, they will see who they have been talking to. Morning came far too quickly. I opened my eyes to a faint gray glow pushing through the curtains, the kind of light that tells you the world is awake, whether you are ready or up. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the quiet thump of footsteps downstairs. Someone was already in the kitchen. Probably my mom. She liked to start Christmas morning early, as if getting ahead of the day could keep anything from going wrong. I pushed myself out of bed and slipped into my warm socks before stepping into the hallway. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted upward, mixed with the faint pine scent from the tree downstairs. For a few minutes, I stood at the top of the stairs watching Mason and Lily, sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, their whispers drifting up toward me. They were pointing at wrapped boxes under the tree, guessing which belonged to who. I went down quietly and sat beside them. Lily leaned her head on my shoulder and said she hoped Grandpa would be nicer today. She said maybe Christmas made grown-ups softer. She said maybe last night had just been a bad moment. I smoothed her hair and told her maybe, though I was not sure I believed it myself. My dad walked in a few minutes later, wearing the smile he saved specifically for holidays and church gatherings. His hair was still damp from the shower, neatly combed back, like he had decided that appearances mattered just as much in his own living room as they did in front of his clients. He greeted the kids and kissed Lily's head before giving me a curt nod. My mom appeared next, carrying a tray with mugs of hot cocoa she had made from scratch. She set them on the coffee table like a peace offering. Chloe followed with her phone already in her hand, angling herself to get the right selfie with the tree glowing behind her. Ryan trailed after her, rubbing his neck and asking if the coffee was ready yet. Then, as if on cue, my dad clapped his hands together and announced that it was time to open gifts. The kids scrambled to the tree, excitement bubbling through them like warm steam on a cold day. I stayed on the couch for a moment, watching everyone settle into place. My dad took charge of handing out gifts, as he always had. He said the same thing he said every year, that Christmas morning was best enjoyed slowly. He said ripping into gifts all at once ruined the experience. He liked order. He liked control. He liked being the center of the ritual. So he started with the kids. Brightly wrapped boxes went into small, eager hands. Shiny paper flew, Laughter echoed. Squeals of joy filled the room. A set of building blocks for Mason. A dollhouse accessory kit for Lily. Matching winter boots for both of them. Their pile grew into a small mountain. Then it was Chloe's turn. She received a cashmere sweater, a delicate gold bracelet, and a pair of designer sunglasses she had shown my mom 2 months earlier. She squealed as if the gift surprised her, even though it was clear she had guided the entire process. Ryan received a new watch and a gift card to his favorite hunting store. He puffed up with pride and made a joke about being spoiled. My dad handed my mom a box that held a pearl necklace. She gasped, covering her mouth with one hand as if she were seeing real pearls for the first time. She kissed him on the cheek, and everyone murmured how beautiful it was. The pile under the tree shrank. Only a handful of gifts remained. I waited for my name. Even after everything. Even though I knew better, I still waited. My dad picked up the next box and handed it to Chloe, then another to Ryan, then one to my mom. He reached for the last wrapped package and gave it to Lily, who thanked him shyly before tearing it open. Then, nothing. Everyone had something in their lap, except me. The room hummed with the crackling sound of torn wrapping paper and satisfied voices. No one noticed at first. Not my mom, not Chloe, not Ryan, but Lily noticed. She looked around, then back at me, her small brows pulling together. She opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, my dad reached for his mug and let out a little laugh, as if something had slipped his mind. "Oh, we forgot you," he said it lightly, almost playfully, but the words hit me like cold water. "We forgot you." Chloe gave a sympathetic smile that did not reach her eyes. She said maybe my gift was still in the closet. Or maybe it had been misplaced. Or maybe it would arrive late because shipping companies were backed up this year. She said all these things quickly, like excuses she did not actually believe but wanted to get through. Ryan shrugged and said sometimes things got mixed up. He said it in a tone that suggested it was no big deal, that adults did not really need gifts anyway. My mom looked uncomfortable for a moment. She glanced at my dad with a small frown, but she did not say anything, not a word. She smoothed the pearls at her collarbone and looked back at the kids. My dad leaned forward in his chair, elbows on his knees. He gave me a half smile that was meant to seem teasing. He told me not to look so serious. He said I was too grown to care about gifts anyway. He said I had my work and my money and my life in Seattle, so surely I did not need another present cluttering my place. Then he tapped his knee with his palm and added in a lower voice that we could talk more about the project later. That there were more important things than gifts. The room went quiet for a long second. Even the kids felt it. Mason's face turned toward me with worry wrapped tight around his expression. Lily touched my hand gently, as if she could fix something she could not name. Inside me, something went still. Not angry, not hurt in the way I expected, just still, like the center of a storm. I let the stillness settle before I spoke. My voice was even, almost soft. I told them it was fine, truly fine. Gifts were not necessary. My dad nodded firmly, as if that proved his point. But I did not move. I did not stand. I did not look away. Instead, I reached slowly for my phone on the coffee table. My fingers closed around it with a kind of clarity I had not felt in years. The room shifted slightly, as if everyone sensed something they could not name. Cole asked what I was doing. That forced little laugh in her voice returned, brittle now. Ryan raised his eyebrows like he was waiting for a punchline. My mom watched me with a kind of frozen politeness. My dad leaned back, smugness curling at the corner of his mouth. He said if I was going to call the bank, we could discuss details after the kids went upstairs. I looked directly at him and felt something sharp settle cleanly into place. I said I was not calling the bank. I pressed a single button on my phone and held it to my ear. Everyone in the room turned toward me. I kept my eyes on my dad and said in a calm voice that carried through the room, "Okay then, time for my call to Santa." The confusion on their faces flickered for only a second before they all tried to laugh. Cole actually clapped her hands together like she thought I was making a joke. My mom managed a tight smile, trying to keep things light. My dad scoffed under his breath about grown women and childish theatrics. But then the line clicked. A voice came through the speaker. Strong, warm, recognizable. powerful enough to stop the air in the room. Harper, is everything all right? I was waiting for your update. Professor Abram Holt, my mentor, my partner in research, one of the most respected scientific leaders in the country. His voice filled the room like a bell. Every head snapped toward me. I held the phone steady in my hand as the silence tightened. He asked if I had time to discuss the expanded federal grant before the end of the week. He said $30 million would move fast once the announcement went public. He asked if I wanted him to loop in the agency director so they could finalize my appointment. Appointment. The word hung in the air like a match near gasoline. My dad's face was drained of color. My mom stopped breathing for a moment. Chloe's mouth fell open, and I sat there, phone to my ear, watching every mask in that room fall away. I could feel the next moment building like the crest of a wave. I did not know yet exactly what I would say, but I knew this. Something in this house had finally split wide open. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Professor Holt's voice flowed out of the little speaker in my hand as if he were standing in the room with us. He sounded amused and focused, the way he always did when we were on the edge of something big. He said he had just gotten off a call with the federal agency. He said the board had not only approved our expansion, but had praised the clarity of my models. He talked about deployment schedules and implementation in multiple states. He mentioned that the director wanted me to serve as the public face of the project once the announcement went live in January. I watched my dad while Holt spoke, the way his eyes narrowed at words like federal board and director, the way his fingers tightened around the arm of his chair until his knuckles went white, the way the smugness fell from his face piece by piece, leaving something raw and unguarded behind. My mom sat perfectly still, her hand frozen halfway to her pearls. The only movement was the slight tremble in her fingers. Cole had stopped pretending to smile. Her lips parted slightly, as if she had lost track of how to arrange her features. Ryan looked at me as if I had sprouted a second head. I realized then that this might be the first time any of them had truly heard my life described in words that could not be dismissed as playing in the dirt. I let a second of silence pass when Holt paused for my response. Then I answered, keeping my voice steady. I told him I was glad to hear the board was confident in the work. I said I was ready to adjust the models for a wider rollout. I thanked him for his trust and told him I would review the documents as soon as I flew back to Seattle. He said of course I would. He said he would not have gotten this far without me. He said the agency director had already called me a crucial partner. He laughed softly and said they were finally seeing what he had seen in me from the beginning. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my dad flinch at that word. Partner. Before we ended the call, Holt asked if everything was all right at home. He said he knew families could be complicated this time of year. His tone carried a familiar kindness, the sort that had held me up more times than my blood relatives ever had. I glanced at my family, sitting there on their carefully chosen furniture, surrounded by their carefully chosen decorations, and felt the weight of all the years I had spent trying to make them proud. Everything is clearer than it has ever been, I said. He seemed satisfied with that. He told me again that he was proud, that this grant would only be the beginning, and that he would see me at the board presentation next month. Then the call ended, and the room was suddenly filled only with the soft hum of Wide, the heater, and the faint rustle of wrapping paper. No one spoke. The image was almost absurd. My niece with a new doll in her lap. My son was clutching the box of building blocks he had just been given. My sister was wrapped in cashmere. My mom with pearls at her throat. My dad is in his best sweater. And me, the one person in the room who seemed to know exactly where her feet were, planted. The first person to break was Ryan. He let out a low whistle and said that sounded like some serious money. His voice wobbled on the word as if he did not quite know how to hold it. Chloe turned her head slowly toward me. She asked in a thin voice if I was really working with the federal government. She asked what $30 million even meant. She laughed once, too bright, and said she had no idea my little plant project was like that. Before I could answer, my dad spoke. He asked if that was really Abram Holt. His tone was rough and confused. He said surely that could not be the same man he had seen on the news talking about climate models and national food security. He said surely that was not the same professor who had been on the cover of the science magazine last year. I told him yes. It was the same man. I watched his throat work as he swallowed. His eyes darted to my phone, then back to my face, as if trying to add new numbers to an old equation. He asked me why I had never told them any of this. The question almost made me laugh. Almost. I asked him when he had ever asked. There was no anger in my voice, just a calm that felt unfamiliar and powerful. I felt Mason shift closer to me on the couch, his shoulder pressed against mine. Lily's small hand was still resting on my wrist. My mom finally found her words. She said she knew I did important work, but she did not realize it was that important. She said I should not have kept it to myself. She said the family should share good news. I reminded her that I had mentioned a large project last night at dinner and had been cut off before I could finish the sentence. I reminded her that she had changed the subject to a gala write-up. She winced at that. Only a little, but it was there. Chloe jumped in then, her voice sharper now. She asked if I had been keeping this from them on purpose. She said it felt cruel to let them sit here worrying about money when I was, apparently, sitting on top of all this opportunity. She asked how I could listen to Dad talk about his business and not offer help in the same breath. That was it. The story they had always told themselves bubbling up to the surface. My value was measured in what I could provide for them, not in who I was or what I had built. I turned toward her. I told her I had spent a lifetime offering pieces of myself that no one here wanted. My time, my ideas, my support. I had offered to babysit when I lived close enough. I had offered to help with website copy for her event business. I had offered to connect her with people in my network when she wanted sponsors. I told her she had said no to all of that. I told her she only seemed interested now that she could smell cash in the air. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. She looked away, twisting the gold bracelet on her wrist. My dad cleared his throat. He said that was enough bickering. He said this was not about blame. He said this was about reality. He said the reality was that my work had clearly opened doors, and that maybe, if we all cooperated, it could help stabilize things for the entire family. There it was again, that word, cooperate. But what he really meant was surrender. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and spoke in the same voice he had used the first time he asked for help. Calm, reasonable, commanding in a way that used to work on me. He said he was impressed by what he had heard. He said he was proud. The words stumbled a little on the way out of his mouth, as if it did not fit quite right yet. He said I was obviously in a strong position, and that if we worked together, we could make sure no one lost anything important. I asked him what he meant by important. He said the house, the company, the reputation, the things he had spent a lifetime building. He did not say my life. He did not mention my son's sense of safety. He did not say my freedom. I sat back against the couch and took a breath. The kids were quiet now, watching the adults with wide eyes. My mom had tears gathering at the corners of her lashes. Cole was biting her lip. Ryan had finally shut up for once, probably calculating angles in his head. I asked my dad if he remembered calling me a farmer in front of everyone. He frowned, annoyed at the change of subject. He said he had just been teasing. I asked if he remembered telling Mason that he behaved like a toddler who did not belong at the table. He shifted in his chair and said he had overreacted. He said stress did that to a man. I told him my entire childhood had looked like his stress. I told him I had spent years trying to be the version of myself he could stomach. And then more years undoing the damage once I realized I would never fit into the box he had built. He started to protest, but I held up a hand. I told him I was glad he had finally heard what my work really was, that he had finally seen a sliver of the world I lived in outside these walls. I told him his opinion of it no longer defined anything for me. His mouth snapped shut. Then I told him something I had not fully admitted even to myself. I said I would not be using my work, my name, or my resources to patch holes in a ship he had insisted on steering alone. The words landed with a heaviness that settled over the entire room. My mom gasped softly. Chloe shook her head as if she had misheard. My dad stared at me like I had spoken in another language. He said I could not be serious. He said this was my family. He said people did not turn their backs on their own. I reminded him that they had turned their backs on me a long time ago. I reminded him that I had been alone in hospital rooms and university offices, and small apartments with past due notices on the table. I reminded him that not one person in this house had offered a safety net when I needed it. He said that was the past. I said it was the pattern. For a long moment, no one spoke. The fire crackled behind the grate. The Christmas lights blinked slowly on the tree. Outside, a car drove past, its tires crunching lightly on the thin layer of ice at the curb. Then I felt a small hand squeeze my wrist. Lily. Her eyes were wide and sad. She whispered that she thought my work sounded important. She said her teacher always told them the people who helped keep food growing were heroes. She said she wanted to be like me when she grew up. That did it. The tightness in my throat finally gave way. I blinked hard and managed a smile for her. "Thank you," I told her. "That means more to me than you know." My dad watched that exchange like he was suddenly seeing something he had refused to look at for years. A child turning toward me for guidance, not toward him, not toward Chloe, toward me. He looked smaller then, not because of his height or his age, but because the pedestal he had put himself on had finally cracked. He stood up, too fast, his knee bumping the coffee table and rattling a mug. He said he needed some air and strode out of the room without looking back. My mom stared down at her hands, twisting them together until the knuckles blanched. Chloe mumbled that she needed to check something in the kitchen and left in the opposite direction. Ryan stayed seated, stuck between wanting to follow her and wanting to keep watching the show. The kids were still sitting on the floor, surrounded by their gifts. Mason leaned his shoulder against my knee. Lily rested her head on my arm. I sat there, in the center of all of it. The tree, the torn paper, the silence. For the first time in my life, I felt like the ground under my feet belonged to me. Not borrowed, not negotiated. Mine. I knew the next conversation would be harder, and it was coming. And it was coming. It did not take long. Maybe 10 minutes after my dad walked out, his office door opened down the hall. I could hear the creak I remembered from being a kid, that old hinge that always needed oil but never got it. Then his voice came from the doorway of the living room, rough and controlled and carrying my name. He said he needed to talk. Just me. Mason looked up at me, and I could see the question in his eyes. I told him gently that I would be right back, and asked him to stay with Lily. She nodded solemnly, like she understood more than any 8-year-old should. Have to. I followed my dad down the hallway into his office. He closed the door behind us, and for a second we stood in the familiar shadows of old trophies and framed contracts, and the big wooden desk that had always felt like a barrier more than a piece of furniture. This time he did not sit behind it. He went to the window instead, looked out at the yard for a long moment, then turned back to face me. Some of the hardness had seeped out of his features. What was left was tiredness and something that looked very close to fear. He said he had spent his whole life believing certain things about what made a man. Providing, winning, being the one people came to when they needed help. He said hearing my conversation with Holt had shown him plainly that I was now the one people went to for real solutions. He said that should make him proud, but mostly it scared him. I leaned against the edge of the desk and waited. He continued. He admitted the money situation was worse than he had let on. He said he had gambled on projects that did not come through, taken on loans that had looked manageable on paper, and turned into anchors in real life. His voice cracked when he said he had thought he was doing it all for the family, that he had wanted us all to live better than he had grown up living, that somewhere along the way, the show had become more important than the substance. He looked at me then, straight on, with none of the bluster he used at the dinner table. He said he was sorry. Not for everything. He was not there yet. But for some of it. For nights I had come home from school beaming with news and been brushed aside. For the way he had spoken to Mason. for letting his fear and his pride turn into sharp words and cold shoulders. I let that sit in the air between us. I had waited decades to hear anything even close to an apology. It did not erase the past, but it mattered that he was trying to reach for it now. Then he said the words I knew were coming. He asked me one more time to consider helping him with the business. He said I did not have to write a check. I could be a partner. Advice on strategy. Let him put my name in front of the bank so they would ease up. He said together we could pull it back from the edge. I thought of the board meetings waiting for me in Seattle. The federal grant timelines. The investors are ready to fund something that could change more lives than anyone in this town would ever know. I thought of Mason and the quiet safety of our small apartment with its mismatched furniture and its freedom. I told him I was glad he had been honest. I told him I did not take his apology lightly. Then I told him I was still not going to rescue him. His face tightened. I explained that my work was not a private bank he could tap whenever his choices caught up with him. I said I had a responsibility to my team, to the farmers depending on our models, to my son. I said tying my future to a sinking company out of guilt would be a betrayal of all the hard nights and lonely mornings that had brought me to where I stood. He said I was being cruel. I said I was being clear. Silence settled over us again. He looked older suddenly, the lines around his eyes deeper, the gray in his hair more visible. For a second, I saw not the man who had terrified me at the dinner table as a child, but a man who had been handed a script about masculinity and worth and never learned how to set it down. He asked me if this meant I was done with them. I told him I did not know what the future would look like. I said I was not closing the door on the relationship. I was closing the door on being used. There was a difference, even if it felt the same from where he stood. He nodded slowly, like he was filing that away. He did not try again to change my mind. He just said he hoped someday I would understand how hard it was for him to ask at all. I told him I already did. When I walked out of the office, my legs felt unsteady. Not because I doubted what I had said, but because holding that kind of boundary against a parent is like lifting a weight you cannot see. In the kitchen, my mom stood alone at the counter, hands wrapped around a dish towel. The sound of the television drifted softly from the living room. She looked up at me, and I could tell by her face that my dad had not told her what we had said. Not yet. She asked if he had begged. The word surprised me. I said he had been honest for once. That was as close as I could describe it. She nodded and then did something I did not expect. She reached into the drawer where she kept miscellaneous notebooks and coupons and pulled out an envelope. She held it out to me. She said she had started writing it the night before when she heard me talking on the phone and realized I had built something far beyond this kitchen. She said she knew she was better on paper than in person when it came to admitting fault. I did not open it. Not then. I slipped it into my bag and told her thank you. Her eyes filled with tears. She said she had not been a kind mom to me, that her fear had come out sideways as control, that she had clung to Chloe because Chloe seemed like the easier version of what a daughter was supposed to be. Then she said she had watched me stand up for Mason and for myself and for what? And she knew I had grown into a woman she did not fully understand, but could. Finally, respect. I felt my own throat burn. I told her respect was a good place to start. We did not hug. Not then, but the air between us felt less icy than it had in years. I spent the next hour helping Mason pack our things. He folded his clothes with more care than usual, which told me he was trying to feel in control of something. Lily brought him a plastic bag for his new blocks and instructed him very seriously on how not to lose any pieces. When he went down the hall to brush his teeth, she slipped me a folded piece of paper. She said she had drawn something for me during the movie. I opened it and saw two figures holding hands next to what was clearly an exaggerated version of my lab. There were little lines on the building that might have been solar panels, and a big field of green scribbles in front of it. She said that was me and her, making food grow for everyone. I managed to keep my voice steady as I told her how much I loved it. I told her I would hang it in my office. Soon enough, it was time to go. The sun was already dipping low, even though it was not that late. Winter days do that. They end before you are ready. We carried our bags out to the rental car. The air was sharp and cold, and our breath puffed out in small clouds. Mason climbed into the back seat and buckled his belt without being asked. Lily stood on the front step in her slippers, hugging her arms around herself. My mom came out and told me to drive safely. Her voice wobbled, but she met my eyes. There was no lecture about coming back more often, just that. My dad appeared last, one hand in his coat pocket, the other resting on the porch rail. For a moment, he looked like he might stay on the step, watching us like a man watching a train pull away. Then he walked down to the car. He stood by my door and cleared his throat. He said he had not been fair to me, not for a long time. He said he did not expect me to forgive him quickly, maybe not at all. But he wanted me to know that hearing Holt talk about my work had cracked something open. He said he was proud of me. The words sounded strange coming from him, like they were trying on a new suit. But they were there. I let myself absorb them without clutching them like a lifeline. They were a gift, not a foundation. I told him I appreciated hearing it. I did not say I had needed to hear it years earlier. Some truths were already thick in the air, even unspoken. He looked at Mason through the window and gave a small nod. Then he stepped back. I got into the car and started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the rearview mirror. My parents stood together on the porch, not touching, watching us go. Lily waved until we turned the corner. The drive back to Seattle took most of the day. Mason fell asleep halfway, his head tipped against the window, his breath fogging the glass. I kept my hands steady on the wheel and let the miles unwind beneath us. Somewhere past the state line, my phone buzzed in the console. When we stopped for gas, I checked it. There was an from Savannah, more detailed this time, laying out her vision for expanding our work. Her subject line made me smile. Building something that lasts. That was what I wanted now. Not a big white house with bank notices tucked beneath its pretty exterior. Not approval that could be yanked away over spilled water or an unwrapped gift. Something real, something rooted. In the weeks that followed, my life in Seattle picked up its own familiar rhythm again. Early mornings at the lab, meetings with the agency, strategy calls with Savannah, dinners with Mason at our small kitchen table, where we talked about school and comics, and sometimes about that Christmas. Though I did not let it dominate every story. My mom called more often. Not every day, but enough that it felt intentional. Once she even asked what Mason was reading in school. My dad sent a short message the day our project was mentioned in a local news segment. He did not say much, just that he had seen it, that it was impressive. I did not know what would happen with the house in Portland, or with the company, or with my parents' marriage. Those were stories they would have to write themselves. My part in them would be smaller now, by choice. What I did know was this. That Christmas had marked something I could not walk back from. I had stopped shrinking to fit their version of me. I had chosen my own reflection over theirs. If you have ever been told you were too much, or not enough, for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you, and where you are listening from.